Hello, music lovers. Welcome back. Happy spooky season. Behold, I have made a techno remix of John Carpenter's Halloween theme. And while this isn't a traditional kind of remix, a few of you have been asking for videos on remixing, so I thought I would use it as an excuse to show you some of my thought process, as this track presents quite a few challenges, like weird timing and multiple keys. So, lots to talk about and lots to learn. Let's go. Okay, so where do we start? We start by studying the original, of course. Here's a little recreate I've got going on. It's so good, isn't it? So the first things we need to know to make any remix are tempo and key. Let's dive in. Here's the iconic piano. So this is in F sharp minor. Well, to start with, anyway, we'll get to that later. If you don't know the notes of F sharp minor, don't worry. It's actually not that important here because this track changes key so often. It's more important that we know the relative distances of the notes. And this riff is moving back and forth between notes 5 and 1, and at the end we have a note 6. So it's 5 1 1 5 1 1 5 1 6 1. Like that. Okay, nothing too strange so far, but look at this. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beats in this bar instead of the usual 4. If you've never paid attention to that thing in the top left of your DAW, you're used to working in 4/4 time, whereas this is in 5/4. In other words, we've got 5 beats in every bar instead of 4. Now, odd time signatures, meaning 5, 7s, 9s, etc., they pose a particular problem in dance music. It stops us using a backbeat, i.e. clap or snare. Normally you place your clap or snare on beats 2 and 4, like that, but in 5 time, this happens. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, it's interesting. Not the easiest thing to dance to though, is it? There is a solution. We just don't have a backbeat. That sounds like this. What I would call a kick-led groove. Perfectly viable, and that's what led me to my first decision: genre. Techno lends itself well to grooves with no backbeat. Also, John Carpenter's original track happens to be bang on 140 BPM. And if you follow any of the great DJs like Nina Kravitz, for example, you'll have noticed the techno sets are certainly up there right now. So between the tempo and not being able to have a backbeat due to the odd time signature, techno seems like the prime candidate. Now, our second challenge, key. Halloween doesn't stay in one key for very long. We start in F sharp, but we only stay there for that intro. As soon as we get into this main piano lick, let me show you what happens. This chord. Now, it seems very simple. Halfway through the lick, all we do is move every note down by one note, one semitone. For visual simplicity, let's look at this in A. Regulars of the channel will know I like to do this. This way, we don't have to learn any minor scales because all the white notes from A make up a minor scale. Nice and easy. So now we can compare to that. Here's the riff in A. Like I said, note 5, note 1, and then we have the 6 at the end. Just swapping between 5-1 and 6-1. Now let's make the second half. So here, everything moves down by one note, one semitone. As you can see, we are now mostly on the black notes. This is D sharp and G sharp. So we can't be in that initial minor key anymore. You might think we're just now in G sharp because we've moved down one, but the bass doesn't do that. The bass moves upwards. Let me show you. So our bass starts on note 1, nice and simple. It steps to note 3. So this is still implying chord 1, because remember, chord 1 is made up of 1, 3, and 5. If you caught my chords video recently, you'll know this is an inversion. The chord is still the same, but the bass has changed note. And the next note the bass moves to is a sharp 3. So the major version of note 3. WTF. What is this chord? Obviously, the bass would imply it's C sharp something. Let's just shift this chord down to A so we can look at it simpler. As you can see, this is made up of note 1, 5, and this is 9. Now that's note 9, not note 2, because the note 3 is over here. If we put note 3 down this octave, you can see how this makes up the chord. We have the typical 1, 3, 5. There's your standard minor chord. And then we call this an add 9 on top. Minor add 9th. So we know what type of chord it is, but it's starting on a note that's not in the original scale. In fact, most of these notes aren't now. So we've clearly left the scale we started on. That means we can say one of a couple of things. We've either changed key, or this is a borrowed chord, or what we call an incidental chord. In other words, we've temporarily gone somewhere else. It doesn't matter what we call it, as long as we understand the movements. And that is the basis for this entire riff. We start on 1. And then we shift to a major third above where we started, or 4 notes, 4 semitones up from where we began. And after that's repeated a couple of times, all that happens is the entire phrase is moved down by 2. All the relative distances, or intervals as we call them, all that stays the same. So let's move this back down to the original starting key, F sharp. That goes round twice, and then we shift everything down by 2. After a couple of rotations of that, we now shift down by 5. So that covers what's going on with the harmony of the whole track. Let me show you the arrangement. You can see I've lengthened all the notes here. It's the same riff, just longer notes to match the feel of the original a little better. And I've separated the top piano from the bass piano, because the bass piano needed to be a lot brighter and hit harder. These are just same notes, just stacked as octaves, as low as it would let me play. Now, this was interesting. Something I didn't notice until re-listening to the original. It has this little pulse synth running all the way through. As far as I can tell, it's playing this. It's definitely got a G sharp at the top. Anyway, that would make it the 9th of the F sharp key that we start in. But it doesn't change as the key changes, which is interesting. That's going to add a lot of dissonance, a lot of clashing notes as it goes out of tune. Certainly great for adding tension to the horror. And as far as I can tell, that stays for the entire duration. So F sharp, and then we shift down 2 to E. Some cellos join. I love this line. It creates a really dark inversion. The upper line here is actually the root notes of the chord. This is that 1, 3, and then sharp 3 that I showed you on the lower end of the piano before. But in the lowest part here, we are holding on the 1, and then we are shifting down 1 to what becomes the 5th of this chord. So depending on whether you class this as the lowest note or the piano, this would be considered an inversion. Either way, very low for a chord note. Gives it a very dark voicing. Then we have some violins join. They're basically holding the top note of the piano melody. So starting on note 5, and then it becomes that added 9th of the chord. You can see I've shifted it early there. That's because violins have a very slow attack, so sometimes you need to move the notes ahead of time if you want them to sound like they're coming in on time. Then at the end, we have this shift down to B, but this time it stays. It doesn't move to that sharp 3 chord. The bass is still moving upwards for tension, but this time just using most of the notes from chord 1. We have 1, 3, 4, and 5. As you can see, the upper melody is staying on B now. We don't have that shift down. Same with the cellos. And then on top, the violins are holding on the 1, eventually adding the 3 for that minor tension. And down here, I have completed the picture with some atmospheric sound effects. We have a thunderstorm, some howling wind, and a percussion hit. That's to accent the lower piano notes. Speaking of atmosphere, practically everything has the Dragonfly reverb on it. Because if you ever need atmosphere, my word, Dragonfly reverb, Hall algorithm. That's all you need. Don't need to spend any money. That's on the piano, that's on the strings, it's on the hits, practically everything. I've also covered everything in virtual vinyl and tape, from the free Tone Boosters Real Bus and Isotope's vinyl for extra lo-fi and pitch wobbly vibes. If you thought the pops and clicks were my microphone breaking, apologies, no, it's just that. I couldn't be bothered to automate it off after I had finished the mix. Sorry. So, we have a weird time signature, and we're also shifting key. As I said, Techno should be fine to take care of the time signature thing, but one thing Techno is not known for is shifting key. Techno normally sticks to the 1. However, There are some tracks out there in the wild that have done it. One of my personal favourite references is Evolve by DVS1. Not only does it have an off time signature ARP for its lead, but also the bass is shifting, just using a simple held bass pad or sub. So that's going to be my main influence for the bass. As for the top line melody reference, the ARP in that track is a little bit too low pitched. I want to be emulating the piano from Halloween. And that brings to mind this track, Submodular by Angelis and Serge. Great ARP there, kind of in the similar range to the piano. So that's the plan. Let me show you how I went about it. Right, so we have our tempo, 140. We have our key, F sharp, or starting key at least. And we have our plan. Let me show you drums first. I've just used Ableton's own for all these, 808s, 909s. It's a 909 kick. You'll notice a heavy bump on the fundamental there. I was trying to get it to match some of the references. As I've decided the bass is going to move, our kick is going to carry that bottom end. And speaking of carrying bottom end, I've actually added a reverb to this kick. Not that uncommon in techno. It's not actually carrying any sub-frequencies though, so we're safe there. It's just a flavor aesthetics thing. Also, the length does change the groove. For the bass sub, I'm just using the sub oscillator from Ableton's own wavetable. It's basically just a sine wave with adjustable harmonics via this dial. Sounding like that. Now here, I was missing a little bit of, shall we call it, low-end busyness, mess, if you will, compared to some of the references. So I've taken a techno kick from Splice, and I'm using it for its after rumble. Only subtle. Now because this extends after the kick, I've made sure it's in pitch. If you can't hear the pitch of something as low as a kick, you can always pitch it up until you can find a distinct note to identify. So in my case, plus 41 sounded like F sharp. So minus 12 from that to take it down the octave, 29, and that sounds good enough to me. So we don't clash with the bass. That means I can now move it with the bass as the bass moves later. Again, only mixed in subtly, purely for aesthetics. If we get any phase cancellation of the sub, I'm not too bothered because the kick is carrying that. Now, for the lead, I tried to recreate the lead from that Submodular reference track. After some trial and error, I thought this sounded cool. It's basically a wonky sine wave from an old Wasp synth, one of the more affordable synths you could get back in the day. This is from the free Echo Soundworks Core Table pack. Make sure you grab that for your wavetable synth of choice. Little bit of resonance on the filter there, trying to give it a little bit of that acid poke. For effects, we've got delay, reverb, and the clipper there, trying to grab some of those resonance peaks from the filter for extra attitude. And here's what it sounds like playing the Halloween riff. Delay timing is quite important here. It's a ping-pong delay set to 1/8 and 1 dotted eighth, so it's bouncing around left to right. Let me show you without delay. Very different groove. Important because the Halloween riff is on eighth notes. Not eighths in length, they're shorter than that, but triggered every eighth, which feels a little slow, especially as it's square rhythm. There's no syncopation here, so the delay gives it a lot of bounce and energy. Even more so when the key changes. Those overhanging repeats add to the chaos. It's good stuff. And of course, let's not forget the pulse synth. I've kept the original. Giving us lots of pace, especially with a little sidechain bounce. Before I show you the first drop, let me show you this. You'll notice I started the track in 4/4, and we don't move to 5/4 until the first drop. This is so DJs can mix in easily. Everything's in normal 8-bar sections, so the timings will be what they are used to. Kick, hi-hat, and I have the synth coming in on a filter. I'm also automating the envelope length, so it starts short and builds up to its full length by the drop. And because we're in 4/4, I've just taken the first 4 beats of the riff, so we don't let it fully complete, which is also good for building tension before the drop. Just adding extra drums. These are all just Ableton's own 808s and 909s. Nothing special going on here. I don't even think any of them have EQ. I brought across some of the rain and wind. I'll go into the synth later. It's just doing what the violins were in the remake. And the drop. Pick up with the drums. Creeping in a pad here. We're going to use that to help identify the changing bass notes. That's just to draw the ear's attention to the fact that the harmony is now shifting, just in case the bass sub was too low. We also have these. A plucked string, accent, just to mark the beginnings of the bar. Because we're in 5/4 now, it can take a little while to adjust. So it helps you identify where the 1 is. Like the original, I shift down a key and we add some extra drums. All 808s, 909s, same. Here we bring in the high synth. That's the line the violins were playing. And I have a low pad here doing what the cellos were playing. That super dark voiced line. An additional octave on the high string for extra energy, and the low pad too. I brought across the tape and vinyl effects to keep that lo-fi wobble. At this point, the lead is getting a little help from the pluck. Both appropriately spooky and kind of a nod to insomnia too. And we break down to just a high tension string with a kick drum and now a pulse synth. with some of those atmosphere effects too. Bringing back the riff in its shorter filtered form. And now I add some of the remake bits. So here we have the piano. This break is basically just the remake now, with the lead synth on top, and we're running the kick throughout. We pick up the drums to build out. Adding a snare roll as we shift down to this B key. Nine and 9, 808. And then to get us into the final drop, because we were in a strange key, I've used what we call a double build. So we break back down to just the riff and a snare. And we throw everything at the last drop. So we have the plucks. Adding some accent notes in there. There's also a higher octave of that. The lead synth is also brighter than the first drop because the filters opened up. The delay's mixed in very high, so it's extra bouncy. The high string is still in. The low pad is just holding note 1. Obviously, the pulse synth is ever present, that stays. Adding yet more hi-hats. We're going to run this on the 1 for 8 cycles, 8 bars. You could run this till the outro, but I wanted to put the changes back in. Piano was joined back in here. Then we run out with extra ride cymbals, snares, less bass. And then for the mix out, we have a minute back at 4/4 in the original key. So even though technically we didn't end in F sharp, I've moved it back to F sharp for the mix out to make it easier to mix out. So DJs who are doing mixed in key don't have to consider starting in one key and ending in another, because their software is only going to be confused by that. And of course back to 4/4, so there's no funny timings either. And there we have it. Techno remix of Halloween. Okie dokie. I'm going to leave it there. Hopefully I'm in time to make a firework display. I hope you found it helpful. Hope you learned something. If you did, you know what to do. Or if you really want to show your appreciation, there's a link in the description to buy me a coffee. And until next time, I'll see you in the comments. Bye-bye.